Hello and welcome to today's graphic design tip of the day. For today's tip, we're going to be looking at layout designs in a little bit more detail. A really great way to practice this is to create a layout design that is created with only text and simple items that could appear as text. So some awesome examples right here of this. It just really challenges you as a designer to not use imagery to make the design really strong, just making sure that your spatial relationships between the typography and the background are going to work really well in that space. All right, a couple things to think about then as you start your design. One is the pattern of eye movement that you want the viewer's eye to go in through the space. So number one, creating a Z pattern or F pattern is really nice, where the viewer's eye is going to enter the scene, go through the space, and then exit at some point. Again, that can be with a Z or the letter F, as you can see in the examples that I have here. Using the rule of thirds is really important for that Z pattern or F pattern, that we're putting the most important details on those rule of third marks. So you can see here in my example that I did add on my rule of thirds. So here's a grid right on top of it, dividing the space into thirds both ways. And if you put the most important things in your design, like the title or any imagery that would really catch the viewer's attention, right at those key intersection points, it's going to read really strong and help to create that eye movement, which you can see right here in the pink line is that Z pattern that's going to be creating that eye movement line through our space. Now, of course, when the design's done, I'm removing these. But this is just an example to show you how to divide the space. If you want to draw a grid on top of your design, especially when you're starting out, it's definitely beneficial so that you know that it's going to be hitting those key points. Or you can also open up the rulers or grid in Illustrator. And number three, going right along with the same idea, using these lines to create movement, whether they're implied or actual lines. Remember, implied lines are going to be lines that aren't actually there. So if I had this little man here on my design, an implied line would be his eyesight line carrying you through. If you're not using an actual animate object anywhere in the design, you can also create implied lines other ways. Another example is an arrow or anything that has a sharp edge to it. It's going to automatically move your eye to whatever that's pointing at. So think about that as you're placing things within the space, anything that would create that implied line or actual line, putting them at those key points that would bring your eye through the space. Anytime that you have an actual line, it's also really nice if it exits on the rule of third lines that we have here. When you add anything to your design after you have the first thing, definitely think about alignment. Everything should be aligned with something else in the space. So that's one thing that I'm going to go through and correct in the design that we have here today. You can see the example here that all these shapes are not aligned. There's no purpose to them. But by placing them and making sure that they're all nice and even and aligned with each other, it makes the design much stronger. So we'll take a look at alignment here in a second on this example. You also want to, number 5, use scale to show what is most important. We call it visual hierarchy, the order in which you want somebody to look at what's in your design. So if I'm making a poster, I probably want the title or main graphic to be most important, the largest, the boldest, have the most contrast. Think about anything else in the order that you want somebody to read it or see it, and make sure that it follows that same pattern or it has a size different, contrast different, to make sure that it's going to pop and really bring your eye through that space. So thinking about alignment again, as I said, let's go ahead and hide our grid marks here. There's not much that is fully aligned in this design yet. So starting with our title up here at the top, let's go ahead and unlock this layer. And I'll lock the other two. And I'm going to go ahead and grab my title text and this kind of subtext that's up at the top. Remember, we do have alignment options in our program. It makes it really nice and easy to make sure that they're perfectly aligned. So if I go over to my properties menu and I have both things selected, you're going to see our alignment options here. So if I click on this first one, I can push that so it's perfectly aligned. Now, in this case, it's aligning it with the outside edge of the box that the B was in. So I am gonna have to grab it. You can use the arrow keys on your keyboard to bump it over just a little bit to make sure that A is going to start right exactly where the start of your B is. And we can do the same thing with the outside of the 10 and the S. I also want to think about the space in between my letters right here, are leading in between our two different lines of text. So if this is a certain distance right here, I'm going to want to keep it pretty even down there. Great way to do that is to just draw a shape right in between. I'm going to make it a different color so you can see that. And then I'm going to take that exact same shape, put it underneath my other word, and let's bump this up so that it's the same amount of space in between there. And I also want my 10 to end where the S does, so let's grab both of those and try our properties menu over here again and see if we can align those with each other. Again, it's going to go to the text box, so I'm going to use my arrow keys to bump that over and make it as even as I possibly can to the start. I could also draw a guideline or again use another box to make sure that I am exactly even here to fine-tune that and make it perfect. Okay, and this would be great, this symbol here that's eye-catching, to be right on my rule of thirds. So let's bring those back for a second and bump this over. And I still want it to align with something else too. So maybe the outside edge of that letter B. I'm going to go ahead and draw a line straight down from that. And let's have that start exactly where the end of my B is and then intersect nicely with my rule of thirds. Okay, and the last thing I have on here is this text box. I definitely don't want it closer to one side of the page than the other. It's not really placed with purpose at all yet here into this space. So let's go ahead and grab that text box and make sure at the very least it's aligned with the page itself. So the same amount of space from the bottom and the right. You also never want to have your text too close to the side of the page. Otherwise it's going to potentially get cut off and it just doesn't look right if it's too close to the edge. So be careful of that as you're adjusting. And again, use your arrow keys. It's really nice to make small movements rather than your trackpad or your mouse. And the other thing that I want to show you on here is if you wanted to create a set of lines that are all even in a row, you can grab, after I've created two lines, both of them, and go up to Object, down to Blend, and over to Blend Options. Change your specified steps here to whatever number of lines you want in between, and then go to Object, Blend, and Make. And you can see I have those nice lines that I can use in my design, or maybe I want to cut them into another shape. Anytime that you draw something and you want to use a cookie cutter to cut part of it out, you can do that very easily by grabbing one of your shape tools or drawing your own shape right on top of that item. Place it where you want to cut, grab the entire thing, and go to right-click, Make Clipping Mask, and you can cut that into a specific shape, which is a really nice effect, especially for a typography layout like this. Also, when you have things that are hanging off the page here, let's turn off that grid marks again, like the B, I definitely don't want that hanging off the page. And people tend to, in Illustrator, if they don't know how to do this, start drawing boxes and grabbing the background color. Don't do this. Use a clipping mask. It's way nicer and cleaner. So with my rectangle tool, I'm going to draw a shape that's the size of my background exactly. Select all of my items in this space and make clipping mask. And it'll cut it so that I can still double click and edit it if I need to, but it's now not hanging off the page and I didn't have to draw all those funky boxes to make that happen. You can also think about overlap in that same sense. So if I wanted to grab this title text here again, let's make a copy of it. And maybe I wanted the letter S to actually go over and under these instead of just under. So once I have a shape drawn on top of what I want to cut, I would grab both the letter and the shape, right click, make clipping mask, and you can see that I can cut just part of that out if I want that line to look like it's going behind the letter S there. You can also do this to cut words apart, change them to different colors. So if I wrote out title as an example here, maybe I want to split this title. I can make a copy of it. So we have two of the same thing. And let's change the color of one of them. Maybe I want the top of it to be black, the bottom to be red, or I cut out a specific shape of it. So let's go ahead and slice through this. Grab both, right click, make your clipping mask. And I can either put it right on top of this text and align it perfectly, or I can cut the other one the same way. So there we go with the perfect alignment of those stacked on top of each other. Or I could grab my pen tool, draw another shape on top of the bottom and do the same thing. This is also a great way to add a little gap in between them. So maybe I didn't want part of them in the center here to actually have a slice through my text. There you go, and you have a nice little gap then in between. So a lot of fun things that you can do using your clipping mask if you are using Illustrator. For anyone using the free program Gravit, you can still create a clipping mask for the outside edge of your page if you wanted to cut something out with that cookie cutter effect that I have been talking about. Unfortunately, you can't do the blending mode, so I had to draw these lines separately. But I grabbed my shape tool, my ellipse tool, and I'm going to place that right on top of my lines that I created. Select all of it, right click, and go to Mask with Shape. And it's going to create that same effect where I now have a circle that was a cookie cutter to cut out those lines in Gravit Designer. I hope you enjoyed today's graphic design tip of the day.